Hey guys, tonight we're embarking on a journey so deliciously unexciting, so utterly devoid of pulse-pounding drama that you probably won't survive to the end. That's the goal, after all. Imagine, if you will, the gentle hum of the cicadas. On a warm summer evening, the soft rustle of sheets as you finally settle in, that feeling of your eyelids growing heavy, heavy, heavy. Now, picture that sensation, but apply it to the history of endurance sports. We're not talking about thrilling photo finishes or world records shattered. Oh no. We're diving deep into the yawning chasm of boring history for sleep, specifically focusing on the world's slowest marathon, not the race itself, but the ponderous, often unremarkable evolution of athletic endurance, starting right at the very, very beginning dot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're feeling up to it, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where you're all drifting off from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself standing on a dusty, sun-baked plain, the air thick with the scent of dry earth and a hint of wood. This isn't a grand stadium filled with cheering throngs. It's just a field. And somewhere, in the fuzzy mists of prehistory, people are probably running. Not for glory, not for gold, but perhaps because the next patch of edible berries was a good distance away, or because someone accidentally poked a grumpy mammoth. We're talking about the truly ancient, almost entirely unrecorded Olympic-like events. The ones that were less about athletic prowess and more about not starving or getting trampled. You can almost feel the gentle ache in your own prehistoric calves just thinking about it. Consider the very concept of a race back then. It wasn't a starting gun and a finish line marked with ribbon. It was likely a let's see who gets there first without collapsing kind of deal. The earliest competitive endeavors, if you can even call them that, were profoundly practical. Think of a group of hunter-gatherers, maybe deciding who gets to carry the heaviest load of firewood by seeing who can trudge the furthest without complaining too much. The winner probably got a slightly larger portion of the evening's meager stew, which, let's be honest, sounds more like a chore than a prize. Historians still argue whether the earliest forms of organized physical competition emerged from survival, instincts, religious rituals, or just plain old boredom on a Tuesday afternoon. There's a theory that some early long-distance races were essentially extended hunts, where the athletic skill was less about speed and more about sustained, monotonous effort. You'd track an animal, maybe for days, slowly wearing it down. Imagine the exhilaration of finally bringing down a gazelle after 3 days of gentle, rhythmic ambulation. It's not exactly a highlight reel moment, is it? More like a documentary about persistence. These were the original ultramarathons, you see, not in the sense of a grand event, but in the everyday grind of existence. A quirky tidbit: some anthropologists suggest that early human endurance running might have been a key evolutionary advantage, allowing us to outlast prey animals in the heat of the midday sun when they would overheat more icily. So, you weren't running against someone, you were running with the sun, slowly, deliberately. Like a particularly determined sloth with a very long to-do list. The prize, not being hungry tomorrow. High stakes, low excitement. You can practically feel the lull of that consistent, undramatic pace. It's the kind of history that whispers, rather than shouts, inviting you to simply exist within it. The rhythmic sound of bare feet on packed earth, a steady breath, the endless horizon. So much nothing stretched out before you, waiting for you to gently fade. Now, let's drift a little further, past the purely practical, into the nascent stirrings of something a bit more structured, but still wonderfully before the trumpets and the laurel wreaths, before the grand temples and the chiseled statues, there was just a village. And in that village, perhaps a few times a year, folks would gather, not for a grand spectacle, but for something more, akin to a community picnic with a bit of a competitive edge. Think of it, a leisurely gathering where, after a hearty, probably bland meal, someone might propose a friendly contest, who can toss this rather lumpy stone the furthest, or who can walk the most laps around that very large oak tree without stopping for a snack. These were the unglamorous ancestors of the discus throw and the marathon, played out with minimal fanfare and likely more yawns than cheers. The focus here wasn't on breaking records or achieving superhuman feats. It was on participation, on community bonding, and perhaps a gentle way to settle a minor dispute over who was the strongest, or most persistent, without resorting to actual fisticuffs. The events themselves were probably designed for maximum inclusion and minimum excitement. Imagine a long-distance walking race where the main challenge was simply not getting bored and wandering off to pick wildflowers. You'd see competitors strolling along, perhaps chatting idly, stopping for water breaks, and generally taking their sweet time. The concept of speed as a virtue was secondary to the virtue of simply finishing. There was no pressure to push yourself to the limit. The limit was probably set by how long you could comfortably ambulate before your bladder insisted on a detour. A mainstream historical fact often overlooked is that before the formal Panhellenic Games, many small, local festivals existed across Greece, each with its own simple athletic contests. These weren't grand affairs drawing participants from across the known world. Instead, they were deeply rooted in the rhythm of local life, tied to harvest cycles, religious observances for minor deities, or simply the changing of the seasons. You wouldn't travel hundreds of miles to participate. You'd just walk down the road to the next village. The athletic events were just one part of a larger tapestry of communal activity, which might include storytelling, feasting, and perhaps a truly dreadful amateur theatrical performance. One quirky or fringe tidbit from these early days. Some historians theorize that certain long-distance foot races were actually practical exercises in message delivery. Imagine a messenger who had to run between two distant settlements, perhaps carrying news of a particularly good olive harvest or a rather dull boundary dispute. To make this arduous task more palatable, or perhaps to simply add a layer of competitive incentive, these messenger runs might have evolved into informal races. The fastest messenger didn't win a medal. They simply got to rest sooner. The slowest messenger, well, they probably just arrived late, and everyone was already asleep, which, ironically, is exactly what we're aiming for tonight. So, the original marathon might have been less about athletic glory and more about avoiding a stern lecture from the village elder for dawdling. The ancient world, particularly in its earliest phases, was far less obsessed with the cult of the athlete than popular. Imagination often suggests, before the rise of the classical Greek city-states and their emphasis on physical perfection and public spectacles, physical activity was integrated into daily life with a quiet, unassuming practicality. You ran because you had to, not because you wanted to see your name etched into a stone tablet. You lifted heavy things because they needed lifting, not to impress a crowd with bulging biceps. The very idea of training for a specific event would have seemed bizarre. Why would you train to do something you already did every day out of necessity? It's like training to breathe. It just happens. And in this slow, gentle unfolding of pre-athletic history, we find the roots of modern endurance. Not in bursts of speed or displays of brute strength, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of walking, trotting, carrying, and enduring. It's the history of putting one foot in front of the other, day after day, without complaint. It's the story of the tortoise, not the hare, repeated across millennia. There's a profound, almost spiritual calm in this kind of sustained, undramatic effort. You're not fighting against time, you're moving with it, letting its steady current carry you along. This deep, almost meditative quality of early human movement is what we're trying to recapture tonight. It's the gentle rocking of a boat on a calm sea, the slow creak of an old house settling for the night, the soft sigh of the wind through ancient trees. Just breathe, just move, just let yourself be carried. No rush, no fuss, just the quiet passage of time and the soothing weight of history. The very thought of it makes your eyelids feel a little heavier, doesn't it? You're still there, drifting along, perhaps a little heavier than before. As we move from the purely practical to the subtly spiritual, imagine the early, almost imperceptible shift from daily survival movements to something more deliberate, more ritualistic, yet still utterly devoid of the bombast you might associate with myth. We're talking about the time when the line between a good harvest and a grateful nod to the heavens became a little blurred, and human exertion started to be seen as a form of devotion, albeit a very sleepy one. Think of those early communities, gathered not in grand, echoing temples, but under the vast, indifferent sky, perhaps near a gnarled, ancient olive tree or a gently flowing stream. The myth here wasn't about gods hurling thunderbolts or heroes slaying mythical beasts. No, these were the quieter, more localized tales. Stories about the spirit of the harvest needing to be coaxed with a long, slow dance, or the river god being pleased by a measured, rhythmic walk along its banks. The rituals were simple, repetitive, almost hypnotic. You wouldn't find dramatic sacrifices or grand processions. Instead, you'd find a collective, sustained effort, perhaps a day-long trek to a sacred grove, a communal pounding of grain that mimicked a slow, steady beat, or a quiet vigil maintained through the night, marked by gentle, repetitive movements. Historians still argue whether these early physical rituals were primarily about appeasing deities, fostering community cohesion, or simply finding a rhythmic way to pass the time before the invention of napping. It's likely a blend of all three, with a generous helping of why not thrown in. You might be asked to carry a basket of offerings over a long, winding path, not at a sprint, but at a deliberate, contemplative pace. The value wasn't in getting there first, but in the sustained effort, the gentle unfolding of the journey itself. The prize, perhaps the quiet satisfaction of a duty fulfilled, or the belief that the crops might be a little more abundant next season, thanks to your sedate exertions, a mainstream historical fact. Many early religious practices across various cultures involve some form of pilgrimage or physical journey. These were rarely, if ever, competitive. You weren't racing your fellow pilgrims to the holy site. Instead, the focus was on the journey's duration, the mental state achieved through rhythmic motion, and the collective experience of moving together. Imagine a group of people walking for days, their footsteps creating a soft, continuous rhythm, their thoughts drifting with the clouds. It's the kind of soundscape designed for maximum tranquility, minimum excitement. You can almost feel your mind emptying, your concerns dissolving with each measured step. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient communities had rituals that involved prolonged, repetitive physical tasks, like grinding grain for days on end, or weaving intricate patterns while reciting chants. The athletic component wasn't about strength or speed, but about sustained focus and almost mindless repetition. The goal wasn't to produce the most grain or the fastest cloth, but to enter a state of trance, a sort of communal flow state. Through the sheer monotony of the task, it's the ancient equivalent of counting sheep, only with slightly more dust and the occasional cramp. You can almost hear the soft, steady scrape of stone on grain, the gentle whir of a spindle sounds. That would soothe even the most restless spirit into submission. It's like a prehistoric ASMR session, guaranteed to dim the lights behind your eyes. You wouldn't have seen elaborate training regimens for these athletes. Why bother? Their daily lives were already a continuous, low-intensity workout. Lifting, water, tending to livestock, walking to gather firewood. These were their drills. And the reward for their effort was not a shiny medal, but the simple continuation of life. Perhaps a slightly fuller belly, or the quiet knowledge that the gods, or spirits, or whoever was listening, might look favorably upon their mundane diligence. There was no concept of pushing through the pain barrier, because the pain barrier was just called Tuesday, and you simply dealt with Tuesday. These were the true unsung heroes of endurance, the ones who didn't know they were being athletic. They were just ... living, and their competitions were more like shared experiences in sustained effort, reinforcing communal bonds through the gentle rhythm of collective movement. The victory wasn't about outdoing someone else, but about collectively enduring together. This shared, quiet persistence laid the groundwork, brick by slow, deliberate brick, for what would eventually, many millennia later, become the more formalized, though still rather dull, from a sleep perspective, athletic endeavors. So, as you picture these ancient communities, moving with gentle intent under a timeless sky, let their quiet effort echo in your own breathing, slowing, steadying, easing you deeper into the comfortable blanket of impending sleep. As the faint whispers of purely practical survival and gentle, undramatic rituals fade, we arrive at something a little more concrete, yet still delightfully subdued. The first recorded games, you might imagine trumpets blaring and chariots thundering. But hold that thought. The earliest documented Olympic Games were, in their essence, a study in Spartan simplicity, not the flashy, Hollywood version of Sparta, but the quiet, stoic, let's just get this done kind of simplicity. You see, the traditional date for the first Olympic Games is 776 BCE. That's a fun fact to drop at a dinner party, isn't it? Did you know the first Olympics involved precisely one event, and it wasn't even very exciting? Because it's true. The inaugural recorded contest was a single foot race, known as the Stadion. Imagine this, a flat track, about 600 feet long or one stayed, hence the name. You line up, perhaps a dozen or so competitors, and you simply run, straight to the end. There were no turns, no hurdles, no dramatic dives. It was pure, unadulterated linear motion. You probably finished, dusted yourself off, and went looking for a modest meal. The winner, they got a simple olive branch, number endorsement deals, no victory parade, just a leafy twig and bragging rights within their local community. Sounds like a recipe for a good nap, doesn't it? The rhythmic thud of feet on packed earth, a steady breath, and then it's over. No need to get worked up. Historians still argue whether the single-event format of the first games was due to a lack of imagination, logistical limitations, or simply because they hadn't yet figured out how to make competitive napping into a sport. It's safe to say that the prevailing mood was one of quiet solemnity rather than exuberant celebration. This was, after all, a religious festival first and foremost. Dedicated to Zeus, the athletic contests were almost an afterthought. A way to honor the gods through disciplined physical effort, but not necessarily through showmanship. You were performing a quiet duty, not putting on a spectacle. A mainstream historical fact about these early games is that participation was initially restricted to freeborn Greek men. No foreigners, no women, no slaves. This wasn't about global inclusion. It was about a specific group of people performing a specific ritual. And the athletes themselves were often not professional competitors as we understand them today. They were farmers, craftsmen, perhaps a shepherd with particularly strong calves. They weren't sculpted specimens gracing magazine covers. They were just regular guys who happened to be decent at running in a straight line. The dedication was admirable, but the results were probably not what you'd call electrifying. And here's a quirky tidbit to lull you further. Legend has it that the first recorded Olympic champion, a cook named Korobos Avilas, was initially reluctant to even participate. He was a cook. Can you imagine? Oh, I'm just here for the catering. Actually, but if you insist I run this one straight dash, it perfectly encapsulates the understated nature of these inaugural games. He wasn't a super athlete with a rigorous training schedule. He was probably just a man who spent a lot of time on his feet, bustling around a kitchen. His victory was less about setting a blistering pace and more about simply being the fastest among a small, probably rather tired group of individuals. You can almost smell the faint scent of roasting meat wafting from his imagined kitchen. Far more appealing than the dust of the track. The emphasis was on the individual's connection to the divine through simple, repetitive physical exertion. There was no complex scoring system, no elaborate opening ceremonies, no closing fireworks. Just the quiet competition, the awarding of the olive branch, and then everyone presumably went home. Maybe a little tired, but certainly not hyped up. You weren't there to be entertained. You were there to witness a tradition, to participate in a communal act of respectful striving. It was the historical equivalent of watching paint dry, but with a spiritual undertone. This understated beginning of the Olympics truly sets the stage for our slowest marathon theme. It reminds you that true endurance isn't always about dramatic bursts of speed or overcoming insurmountable odds. Sometimes it's just about showing up, putting in the quiet, steady effort, and getting to the end. Just like your journey tonight, you're not racing to the finish line of wakefulness. You're simply moving through the gentle narrative, letting each detail, each historical whisper, slow your mind, ease your thoughts, and guide you gently towards the quiet, peaceful conclusion of your conscious day. The stillness of the ancient track, the quiet determination of Korobos the cook, the rustle of a simple olive branch. It all contributes to that delicious, sleepy calm. As the gentle echo of that first, rather plain, stadium race fades, you might imagine a sudden explosion of athletic exuberance. But no, you'd be mistaken. The evolution of the ancient games, much like the slow drift towards sleep, was a gradual, almost imperceptible process. We now settle into the early sporting events, tedious endurance, where the focus wasn't on electrifying sprints, but on a profound, almost hypnotic repetition. Imagine the ancient world, not as a place of constant drama, but as a vast, quiet stage for enduring effort. After the single foot race, the games gradually expanded, but the new events were designed more for sustained drudgery than for thrilling. Spectacle, take for instance, the Dolichos, a long-distance foot race, while the stadion was a mere dash across a field. The Dolichos could range from 7 to 24 stades. That's roughly 1.5 to 5 kilometers, or about a mile to 3 miles. For the ancient Greeks, without modern running shoes, perfectly smooth tracks, or even the concept of carbohydrate loading, this was a significant haul. You weren't flying, you were grinding. Picture yourself a Dolichos runner, your bare feet padding rhythmically on the dusty track, lap after unvarying lap. The sun beats down, the air is thick with heat, and the crowd, if they're even paying attention, is probably just as bored as you are. Each stride is identical to the last, a monotonous meditation in motion. There's a certain beauty in that repetition, a deep, soporific rhythm that slowly, inexorably pulls you down. Historians still argue whether the expansion to events like the Dolichos was a genuine desire for more athletic challenge or simply a pragmatic way to fill more time during the festivals, akin to adding an extra long, slow instrumental piece to a concert. My money's on the latter. The goal wasn't to awe, it was to occupy. The runners would often maintain a steady, almost plodding pace, conserving energy over the extended distance. There were no sudden bursts of speed, no dramatic surges, just a continuous, unhurried progress, like a glacier inching its way across the landscape. You could probably drift off for a solid 10 minutes, wake up, and the runners would still be on the same lap. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Greeks placed a high value on endurance, perhaps even more so than explosive speed. The ability to sustain effort over long periods was seen as a virtue, reflecting discipline, resilience, and a certain stoicism. It wasn't about the flash of the sprinter, but the quiet determination of the long-distance plodder. This philosophy seeped into their military training too. Soldiers were expected to march for days on end, carrying heavy gear without complaint. So, these tedious endurance races were not just athletic contests. They were reflections of a broader cultural value system that prized perseverance above all else. It's the kind of virtue that makes you feel very, very sleepy. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that water stations, if they existed at all, were incredibly rudimentary. You might get a cup of lukewarm water from a communal pitcher, probably after having to ask for it politely from a volunteer who looked just as bored as you felt. No energetic hydration teams cheering you on, no electrolyte drinks, just water, maybe if you were lucky. This absence of fanfare contributed to the overall sense of quiet drudgery. Imagine the utter bliss of a modern runner seeing a table laden with fresh fruit and cheering volunteers after miles of effort. Then contrast that with the ancient experience. Just more dust, more heat, and the promise of another mile. The very thought is enough to make your eyelids feel heavy. Then there was the Diolose, essentially 2 stades, or a double sprint. Still short, but now you had a turn involved. A simple pivot, nothing dramatic. You ran down, turned around a post, and ran back. It introduced a modicum of complexity, but imagine watching it. Runner runs, turns, runs back. Then another runner, then another. It's like watching a line of ants carrying crumbs, each one doing the same thing over and over. You could almost feel the rhythm of their steps, a gentle, repetitive beat that would pull you deeper into a state of quiet contemplation. or, more likely, unconsciousness. The ancient pancration was a fascinating, if brutally simple, martial art that combined wrestling and boxing. While it sounds intense, for our purposes tonight, consider its sheer, unyielding length. Matches could go on for hours, with competitors slowly, methodically wearing each other down. It wasn't a quick knockout, it was a battle of attrition. You'd see two bodies grappling, pushing, pulling, with a slow, grinding intensity that felt less like a fight and more like a prolonged, slightly violent cuddle. The lack of rounds meant a continuous flow of low-level exertion, interspersed with moments of slightly higher effort, but never truly explosive. Imagine watching two sleepy bears wrestling in the sun. It's captivating in its slowness, but hardly. Heart-pounding. And even the more seemingly active events, like the discus throw or the javelin throw, were spread out with long waits between attempts. You'd watch a competitor carefully prepare, maybe scratch their nose, squint at the sun, adjust their stance a few times, then finally, after what felt like an eternity, they'd throw, and then you'd wait again. It wasn't about rapid fire action, it was about measured, deliberate pauses, giving you plenty of time to zone out between each relatively brief moment of exertion. The sounds of the discus sailing through the air, the soft thud as it landed. It's a gentle auditory rhythm that complements the quiet visual. The early Olympics, in many ways, mirrored the slow pace of life itself in ancient Greece. There was no instant gratification, no high-speed information flow. Everything took time. Building a temple, planting a crop, traveling from one city to another, it all involved patience and sustained effort. So, it's only natural that their athletic contests would reflect this inherent slowness. It wasn't just about the athletes. It was about the culture, the air, the very fabric of existence. The competitions were not designed for the ADD-addled modern mind, but for a sensibility that appreciated the quiet unfolding of events. Historians still argue whether the lack of distinct sports seasons meant that athletes were in a perpetual state of low-level training, or whether they simply ramped up their efforts a few months before the games, then promptly went back to their regular, undemanding routines. My guess is it was more the latter. The idea of year-round, intensive athletic training was likely as foreign to them as the concept of a protein shake. They simply continued their daily lives, which, as we've established, were already full of low-intensity movement. It was all a wonderfully boring cycle of life, punctuated by mildly competitive walking dot. So, as you picture these early games, let the endless laps of the Dolocus runner, the slow grappling of the pancratiasts, and the long, silent pauses between throws settle over you. Imagine the hushed murmurs of the sparse crowd, the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant drone of an insect. It's all part of a grand, ancient lullaby designed to ease you into the deepest, most peaceful slumber. Just another moment of history, stretching out, becoming softer, quieter, pulling you gently down. As the echoes of the Dolocos runners fade into the ancient dust, we now turn our gaze to the even more wonderfully mundane topic of training regimens, unremarkable daily drills. Forget montages of athletes leaping over flaming hurdles or lifting impossibly heavy weights. The ancient Greek athlete, particularly in the earlier periods, was less about intense, specialized training and more about the quiet, unglamorous grind of everyday existence. You weren't pushing limits, you were simply living, and that living itself was the training. Imagine yourself as a young Greek man, aspiring to compete in the games. Your gym wouldn't be a gleaming temple of iron and sweat. It would be your family's farm, or perhaps the local village square. Your personal trainer would be the relentless demands of a pre-industrial life. You'd wake with the sun, not to a blaring alarm, but to the gentle chirping of crickets. Your first drill might be hauling water from a well, the cool weight of the amphora settling onto your shoulders, a gentle, repetitive strain that built strength without fanfare. Then, perhaps, you'd spend hours tending to olive groves, bending, stretching, pruning, each movement a slow, deliberate exercise in flexibility and sustained effort. You'd herd sheep across uneven terrain, your calves silently protesting with each step, yet growing stronger with every mile. This was their cross-training, their cardio, their strength work, all rolled into one long, continuous, utterly undramatic day. Historians still argue whether the concept of deliberate training, as we understand it, even existed before the professionalization of athletics in later antiquity. It's more likely that physical prowess was seen as an outgrowth of a healthy, active lifestyle. You were fit because you had to be, to survive, to work, to contribute to your community. The idea of dedicating hours solely to repetitive movements, without a direct, immediate purpose, would have seemed, well, rather inefficient. Why run laps around a field when you could be running errands or chasing down a runaway goat? That goat, my friends, was the original HIIT workout. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Greek athletic preparation is that a significant part of it revolved around diet and regimen, but not in the caloric-counting, macro-obsessed way we think of today. Instead, it was about living a disciplined life, which was seen as a holistic approach to readiness. This meant moderation in eating and drinking, avoiding excesses, and engaging in regular, if often low-intensity, physical activity. It was less about getting swole and more about not getting sick or not being too tired to work. The ultimate goal was balance, not extremity. It's the kind of philosophy that makes you feel profoundly calm, the opposite of the buzzing energy drinks and high-impact training of today. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some ancient Greek trainers, who were more like mentors or guides, would prescribe specific exercises based on the season. For example, in winter, when outdoor work might be limited, they might recommend more indoor exercises like shadow boxing or rudimentary forms of wrestling. It wasn't about progressive overload. It was about adapting to what was practically feasible. Imagine a trainer telling you, well, it's raining, so I suppose you could do some slow, deliberate arm circles by the fire today, just for a bit. It's charmingly low stakes, isn't it? The kind of training that would probably put you to sleep faster than the actual competition. Consider the notion of periodization, which is so central to modern athletic training. In ancient Greece, their periodization was dictated by the harvest, the planting season, the religious festivals. Your peak performance would naturally align with the time of year when the games were held. Not because of a carefully constructed training cycle, but because that's when you'd naturally be at your physical best, having completed one cycle of intense agricultural labor, and before the next began. It was organic, unforced, and profoundly in tune with the natural world. And what about specialized equipment? Forget the sophisticated gear of today. Your weights might have been stones from the riverbed. Your resistance bands perhaps a sturdy vine. Your running track was whatever path led from your home to the next village. The simplicity is astounding and incredibly, wonderfully dull. There was no concept of performance-enhancing drugs, unless you count a particularly robust meal of lentils and water. You competed with what you had, and what you had was usually just your own body shaped by the quiet, consistent demands of daily life. The training itself was often communal, but again, not in the sense of a high-energy group class. Imagine a group of men, perhaps after a long day in the fields, gathering to practice some wrestling holds, or to see who could toss a discus the furthest. It was social, yes, but also deeply practical, a way to maintain physical readiness and perhaps to politely challenge one another without undue fanfare. There was no pressure to break personal bests every day. The focus was on consistent, moderate effort. It was about sustaining, not excelling. Historians still argue whether the early Olympic competitors practiced specific drills for the stadion or dolichos. Some believe they simply ran those distances occasionally as part of their general fitness. Others suggest there might have been rudimentary forms of interval training, where they would run short bursts followed by slower recovery. But it would have been intuitive, not scientific. It was all very much fly by the seat of your toga. The prevailing wisdom was simply that a healthy body, kept active through the demands of daily life, would naturally be ready for competition. No need for complex spreadsheets or heart rate monitors. The very concept of a training camp would have been an amusing absurdity. Why would you go somewhere else to do what you already did at home? Unless training camp meant a slightly more luxurious barn with marginally better food, it wouldn't have made much sense. You trained by existing. You built endurance by walking everywhere. You developed strength by carrying things. And you gained speed by, well, perhaps occasionally having to sprint away from an angry farmer whose crops you accidentally trampled. These were the organic, unscripted drills that prepared them for the simple, often tedious, athletic events of their time. So, as you envision these ancient athletes, not in a brightly lit gym, but under the vast ancient sky, performing their quiet, daily labors, let the rhythm of their movements seep into your consciousness. The gentle swing of the arm as they sow seeds, the steady pull as they draw water, the rhythmic pad of bare feet on a dirt path. It's a peaceful, unchanging tableau of human effort, stretching back through millennia. This slow, persistent rhythm of ancient training, devoid of urgency or spectacle, is the perfect companion to your journey towards deep, restful sleep. Just breathe, just exist, and let the quiet, persistent hum of history carry you further into the gentle night. From the rhythmic thud of ancient training, we now transition to the equally undramatic world of diet and nutrition. Plain, unappetizing fare. Forget the brightly colored protein shakes, the intricate meal plans, or the superfoods of today. The ancient Greek athlete, like most people of their time, subsisted on a diet that was, by modern standards, incredibly bland, repetitive, and designed for sustenance, not for peak performance or culinary delight. This is the kind of culinary history that perfectly prepares you for a long, peaceful stretch of nothingness. Imagine yourself, an aspiring Olympian, sitting down for a meal. Your plate wouldn't feature a perfectly grilled salmon with quinoa and steamed asparagus. No, you'd likely be looking at a bowl of barley porridge. This was the staple, the undisputed champion of the ancient Greek diet. Ground barley mixed with water, perhaps a splash of olive oil, and if you were feeling particularly extravagant, a few herbs for flavor. It was filling, yes, but exciting, not so much. Think of it as the ultimate comfort food for a very, very comfort-seeking existence. It's the culinary equivalent of watching paint dry, but you have to eat it. The warm, mushy texture, the mild, earthy taste. It's a gentle, unassuming meal that doesn't demand much of your senses. allowing your mind to simply drift. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of a barley-heavy diet were based on empirical observation of what kept laborers strong, or simply on the widespread availability and affordability of barley. It was the original clean eating, not out of choice, but out of necessity. Meat was a luxury, typically reserved for religious festivals and special occasions. So, your athlete's diet would have been largely vegetarian, focusing on grains, legumes, olives, and perhaps some figs or grapes when in season. This means a lot of fiber, a lot of slow-release energy, and a whole lot of chewing. You'd be digesting slowly, thinking even slower, feeling that wonderful, heavy sense of fullness that precedes a deep slumber. A mainstream historical fact about ancient Greek athlete diets is their emphasis on simplicity and purity. They believed that food should be natural and unprocessed. This meant avoiding rich sauces, excessive spices, and anything that might be considered decadent. The goal was physical and mental clarity, not gastronomic pleasure. It was a diet designed to keep the body functioning efficiently, like a well-oiled, albeit very plain, machine. This stripped-down approach to eating meant less digestive excitement, fewer sugar crashes, and a more consistent, low-key energy level perfect for sustained, unhurried effort. It's the kind of meal that makes you want to lie down immediately. After, and here's a quirky tidbit, ancient athletes were often advised to eat a specific type of cheese, known as mousse. It was a fresh, soft cheese, likely made from sheep or goat's milk. While it sounds a little more exciting than barley porridge, imagine eating it every day, perhaps with a side of more barley. It wasn't a gourmet experience. It was just another source of protein and fat added for sustenance. You weren't savoring each bite, you were simply consuming. It's the kind of food that serves its purpose admirably but inspires absolutely no poetic verse. You can almost feel the gentle, soft texture of the cheese on your tongue, a mild, comforting sensation that eases your thoughts. Fish, when available, would have been a welcome but rare addition. And while they had wine, athletes were encouraged to drink it diluted with water and in moderation. No pre-race carb-loading parties with celebratory toasts, just watered-down wine, perhaps after a long, quiet meal. The overall caloric intake would have been substantial, given their active lifestyles, but the variety, almost non-existent. You'd eat similar meals day in and day out, building a routine so predictable it would lull you into a stupor before you even finished your first bowl of porridge. Imagine the sheer lack of sensory stimulation from these meals. No strong flavors to jolt your palate awake, no exotic aromas to pique your interest, just the gentle, consistent taste of wholesome, unremarkable ingredients. It's the kind of food that encourages quiet reflection, or, more accurately, quiet oblivion. You wouldn't be thinking about complex philosophical problems after such a meal. You'd be thinking about how comfortable your sleeping mat looks. Historians still argue whether certain trainers had their own secret dietary recipes for success, perhaps involving specific herbs or a particular way of preparing the barley. But even if they did, the core ingredients remained the same: simple, earthy, and uninspired. The innovations, if any, would have been minor tweaks, not revolutionary breakthroughs. It was a world where nutrition was viewed through the lens of basic fuel, not as a complex science to be optimized for marginal gains. The goal was simply to be ready, not superhuman. And what about snacks? Forget energy bars or fruit chews. Your midday pick-me-up might have been a handful of dried figs or a few olives. Healthy, yes, but not exactly a burst of excitement. The rhythmic chewing, the slow release of energy, it's all part of the continuous low-key flow of ancient life that's so conducive to a state of profound calm. You're not being fueled for a sudden sprint, but for a long, slow journey. So, as you imagine the ancient Greek athlete diligently consuming their endless bowls of barley, porridge, and modest portions of cheese, let the blandness of their diet wash over you. Feel the gentle, sustained energy it would provide, the lack of sharp peaks and valleys in your energy levels. It's a diet designed for steady, unwavering effort, a constant, low hum of physical readiness. And it's this very lack of excitement, this profound simplicity in their daily fare, that becomes another soft pillow for your mind, easing you deeper into the quiet, dark comfort of sleep. From the quiet, unappetizing meals of the ancient athlete, we now shift our sleepy gaze to the experience of those who came to witness these early games. The spectator experience, lengthy, uncomfortable viewings. If you're imagining grandstands, filled with cheering crowds, hot dogs, and gigantic foam fingers, well, you're wildly off the mark. The reality was a prolonged, often tedious affair, designed to test the patience of even the most dedicated enthusiast. This is the history of watching history unfold, very, very slowly. From a decidedly hard surface, you find yourself arriving at Olympia, not in a sleek car or a comfortable bus, but probably on foot, having walked for days, perhaps even weeks, across dusty roads, your seat for the events. A patch of sun-baked earth, or perhaps, if you were lucky and arrived early, a slightly elevated mound of dirt. There were no cushioned benches, no shade structures, no convenient snack vendors. Every few feet, you were at the mercy of the elements, the glaring sun, the swirling dust, and the occasional gust of wind that would whip up sand into your eyes. Imagine settling in for a long, dull afternoon, without a phone to scroll through, without even a good book, just you, the dirt, and the endless, slow unfolding of ancient athletic prowess. The very thought is enough to make you feel a delicious weariness creeping in. Historians still argue whether the lack of comfortable seating was a deliberate part of the ascetic nature of the games, designed to promote focus and humility, or simply a reflection of the technological limitations and priorities of the time. My money's on a bit of both, seasoned with a healthy dose of why bother, they'll show up anyway. Spectatorship was less about entertainment and more about pilgrimage, a civic and religious duty. You weren't there to be thrilled, you were there to bear witness. This inherent lack of comfort is a feature, not a bug, for our purposes tonight. It emphasizes the quiet fortitude required, not just of the athletes, but of everyone involved. A mainstream historical fact is that women were generally forbidden from attending the Olympic Games, especially married women. This rule, however, had a famous exception: the priestess of Demeter Chaman, who had a privileged seat of honor. This exclusion meant the spectator demographic was overwhelmingly male, perhaps leading to a different kind of crowd dynamic, one that might have been less boisterous and more, dare I say, prone to quiet contemplation, or perhaps polite snoring. Without the diverse energy of a mixed crowd, the atmosphere would have been far more subdued, a low hum rather than a roar. It's the kind of quiet historical detail that invites your own quiet reflection, and perhaps a gentle descent into slumber. And here's a quirky tidbit to add to the discomfort. Sanitation facilities were, shall we say, minimal. Think open fields and a distinct lack of hand-washing stations. Attending the games for multiple days meant enduring not just the physical discomfort of sitting on the ground, but also the olfactory challenges of a large gathering of people in a pre-plumbing era. It was a sensory experience, yes, but not necessarily a pleasant one. The faint earthy smells, mingling with the scent of sun-baked skin and the occasional distant whinny of a horse, contributed to a deeply organic, yet entirely unglamorous, backdrop. You can almost smell the dust and the faint aroma of a long, hot day. It's a very specific sensory detail, but one that adds to the pervasive sense of unhurried history. The schedule of events itself contributed to the tedium. Unlike modern Olympics, with their tightly packed schedules and multiple events running simultaneously, ancient games were spread out over several days, with long gaps between individual contests. You might wait hours for a single race, watch it conclude in a matter of seconds, and then settle in for another prolonged wait for the next event. There was no instant replay, no commentary, no giant screens to fill the void. Just the vast, empty space, the distant murmuring of the crowd, and the slow march of the sun across the sky. It was a masterclass in patience, an endurance test for the eyeballs. Imagine the conversation among spectators during these long lulls. Perhaps quiet discussions about agricultural yields or the price of olive oil in their hometown. Certainly not animated debates about athletic technique or world records. The topics would have been as mundane and unexciting as the events themselves. You wouldn't hear excited shouts. You'd hear the gentle drone of human voices, a soft, indistinct murmur that blends seamlessly with the background hum of insects and the distant bleating of sheep. It's the kind of sound that doesn't demand attention, but rather invites your mind to simply drift. The concept of a fan, as we know, Aitan, intensely loyal, emotionally invested supporter, was also different. Spectators were more observers, part of a collective ritual, rather than individuals caught up in passionate allegiance to a team or an athlete. Their applause, if any, would have been polite, perhaps a smattering of claps rather than roaring. Ovations. There was a sense of decorum, a quiet respect for the solemnity of the occasion. No boisterous chants, no elaborate banners, just a shared, quiet observation of human effort. The very air would have felt heavy with this quietude, conducive to nothing but a deep, peaceful calm. Historians still argue about the precise daily schedule of the games, but most agree that morning events would give way to lengthy midday breaks, often due to the intense heat, before resuming in the late afternoon. This meant even more waiting, more staring into space, more opportunities for your internal clock to wind down. You'd probably bring a small amount of food and water, maybe a bit of dried fruit or some more of that famously bland cheese. But there were no elaborate concessions. Survival was key, and entertainment was a distant, secondary consideration. This enforced leisure, this necessary slowing down, is the core of our boring history and its sleep-inducing power. The journey to the games was also an integral part of the spectator's experience, often a pilgrimage in itself. You wouldn't just show up. You would embark on a journey that could take days or weeks. This journey involved walking, camping out under the stars, perhaps encountering fellow travelers along the way. By the time you arrived at Olympia, you were likely already quite tired, physically and mentally. The games, therefore, weren't just an event. They were the culmination of a personal endurance feat. And after such a journey, settling down on the hard ground to watch even slower events would have felt like a luxurious opportunity for rest. A chance for your body and mind to finally unwind. Think of the silence. Imagine the moments before a race or after a discus throw. There wasn't the constant cacophony of modern events, just the natural sounds of the environment, the breeze rustling through the olive trees, the distant bleating of goats, the buzz of insects. These natural soundscapes are universally soothing, the perfect accompaniment to a quiet story. It's the deep listening that precedes a peaceful descent into sleep, where every rustle and hum becomes part of a larger, calming tapestry. The absence of artificial light also meant that events concluded with the setting sun. There were no floodlights, no evening sessions stretching into the late hours. The day's events would simply fade with the light, ushering in a natural, unhurried end to the proceedings. This natural rhythm, dictated by the sun and the moon, further contributed to the sense of timelessness and quiet completion. You wouldn't be stimulated by bright lights or loud noises after dark. You'd be enveloped in the soft embrace of the ancient night, ready for slumber. So, as you visualize these long, dusty, and delightfully uncomfortable ancient viewing experiences, let the quietness, the slowness, and the pervasive sense of patient endurance wash over you. Feel the warmth of the sun on your skin. Hear the distant, indistinct murmurs, and imagine the quiet anticipation of an event that would unfold with glacial speed. This profoundly understated spectacle is the ideal historical backdrop for your own journey into a deep, uninterrupted sleep. Just listen to the soft cadences of the past and let yourself drift. Having immersed ourselves in the quiet discomfort of the ancient spectator experience, we now turn to a concept that, on the surface, sounds rather dramatic, but was, in its ancient reality, a wonderfully bureaucratic and therefore inherently boring interlude, the truce, an uneventful interlude. This wasn't a thrilling cessation of hostilities marked by grand peace treaties. It was a practical, almost administrative agreement designed to ensure safe passage to a religious festival. It's the kind of historical detail that makes you yawn with admiration for its sheer lack of excitement. The concept we're drifting into is the Icacheria, or the Olympic Truce. This wasn't a universal ceasefire in all ongoing conflicts across the Greek world. Oh no, that would be far too exciting. Instead, it was a temporary, sacred agreement that guaranteed safe passage for athletes, their families, and spectators traveling to and from the Olympic Games in Olympia. Imagine the bureaucratic paperwork involved, the messengers trudging across dusty roads, delivering scrolls that essentially said, "Please don't attack anyone heading to the Games for a few weeks. Thanks." The very thought of it paints a picture of slow, deliberate communication, of agreements made by tired officials in dimly lit rooms, a process utterly devoid of urgency. Historians still argue whether the truce was universally observed or if there were frequent violations. It's likely that its effectiveness varied depending on the political climate and the belligerence of particular city-states. But the ideal was one of quiet, temporary peace, a pause in the usual squabbles, purely for the sake of a religious festival. It wasn't about world harmony, it was about logistical convenience, the kind of agreement that would be signed with a gentle sigh of relief, not a triumphant flourish. This pragmatic aspect makes it perfectly suited for a sleep narrative, a necessary lull in the usual hustle and bustle of ancient life. Amainstream. Historical fact about the Icacheria is that it was announced by special heralds, known as spondephoroi, who would travel to various Greek city-states. Picture these messengers, not galloping furiously like valiant heroes, but rather moving at a steady, unhurried pace, perhaps stopping for a leisurely lunch along the way. They carried no weapons, relying on their sacred status to ensure their safety. Their arrival in a city would be a quiet event, a simple declaration, not a dramatic interruption. The news would spread slowly, by word of mouth, by the gentle murmur of anticipation, creating a pervasive calm that permeated the travel routes to Olympia. You can almost feel the air growing softer, the tension easing, as the news of the truce spread like a gentle ripple across a still pond. And here's a quirky tidbit. The truce was not just for the duration of the games themselves, but also for a period before and after them to allow for travel time. This meant that for several weeks each quadrennial, there was a designated period of mostly safe movement across the Greek landscape. Imagine the sigh of relief from merchants and travelers who could finally journey without fear of being accosted, even if only temporarily. It wasn't about grand gestures of peace, but about the mundane relief of a temporarily safer commute. It's the ancient equivalent of a particularly smooth traffic flow, utterly unremarkable, yet profoundly soothing. The truce's main purpose was to allow the games to be a truly pan-Hellenic all-Greek event, drawing participants and spectators from rival city-states. Without this agreement, the journey would have been fraught with danger, effectively limiting participation to those who lived nearby or those with significant military escorts. The truce democratized access, allowing more people to experience the quiet splendor of the games, even if their experience involved prolonged periods of uncomfortable sitting, as we've already discussed. It facilitated a period of mild, temporary normalization, a gentle suspension of the usual political rivalries. This absence of active conflict meant that for a few weeks, the primary concern for travelers was not ambushes or skirmishes, but rather the more mundane challenges of ancient travel, finding water, avoiding grumpy donkeys, and perhaps finding a decent spot to rest under the stars. The worries were about blisters and boredom, not about battles. This shift in focus from external threats to internal endurance is a central theme in our sleepy history. You're not fighting, you're simply enduring, gently. Historians still argue about the philosophical underpinnings of the Ikacheria. Was it born purely out of religious reverence for the sanctuary of Olympia? Or was it a practical diplomatic tool to foster a semblance of unity among often warring city-states? It's likely a complex interplay, but its most profound impact was practical. It allowed people to move, slowly and safely, towards a common, albeit unexciting, destination. The shared journey, the gentle movement of diverse peoples converging on a single, sacred site, created a collective sense of purpose that transcended immediate hostilities. It's the kind of quiet, shared experience that builds community, not through high drama, but through shared, peaceful monotony. Consider the ripple effect of such a truce on daily life. Farmers could perhaps tend their fields without the constant fear of sudden raids. Travelers could carry goods with a little less anxiety. It was a brief, almost imperceptible easing of tension across the landscape, allowing the rhythms of ordinary life to proceed with a slightly gentler hum. It was the background noise of peace, not the foreground noise of war. And that background hum, soft and consistent, is precisely what we're cultivating for your journey tonight. The very slowness of ancient communication also contributed to the uneventful nature of the truce's implementation. News traveled at the pace of a walking man or a slow sailing ship. There was no instantaneous broadcast, no sudden declaration that would shake the foundations of the world. Just the gradual, gentle dissemination of information, allowing ample time for its implications to settle, for the peace to slowly, quietly take root. This unhurried pace of information flow meant that any shift in the political landscape was felt not as a shockwave, but as a slow, almost imperceptible change in the prevailing wind. So, as you picture the spondophoroi gently making their rounds, delivering their quiet message of temporary peace, and as you imagine the gradual calming of the ancient world as travelers slowly, patiently, make their way to Olympia, let the pervasive sense of a deliberate, bureaucratic truce wash over you. It's not a dramatic ending to conflict. It's a calm, administrative pause, a temporary agreement for the sake of a larger, sacred purpose. This uneventful interlude in the tumultuous history of ancient Greece is the perfect mental balm, easing your mind into a deeper, more profound state of relaxation. Just breathe, just feel the quiet peace, and let yourself drift. Having peacefully navigated the bureaucratic stillness of the Olympic Truce, we now shift our sleepy focus to the athletes themselves, or rather, to what they wore, or more accurately, what they didn't wear. We're talking about athletic gear, simple, unremarkable attire. Forget the flashy, high-tech performance fabrics, the custom-molded shoes, or the compression wear of today. Ancient athletes were the epitome of minimalism, and their gear was functional, basic, and utterly, delightfully boring in its simplicity. This is the kind of historical detail that makes you appreciate the unencumbered ease of simply existing. Imagine an ancient Greek athlete preparing for a race. You wouldn't see them lacing up expensive trainers or adjusting a high-performance tracksuit. Instead, you'd likely see nothing. Yes, you read that right. The most striking mainstream historical fact about ancient Olympic athletes, particularly those competing in running events, was that they often competed nude. This wasn't a sudden, daring fashion statement. It was a gradual evolution, and by the classical period, it was the norm. The idea was to celebrate the human form, to show the body as a natural instrument, unencumbered by artificial adornments. For our purposes, it means less rustling fabric, less chafing, and frankly, less visual distraction. Just the quiet movement of muscle and bone. This profound simplicity, this stripping away of all non-essentials, is wonderfully conducive to a state of calm. Historians still argue whether the practice of competing nude began as a religious purity, ritual, or simply as a practical response to the heat and the demands of vigorous exercise. There's a story, possibly apocryphal, about an early runner whose loincloth fell off mid-race, and he simply kept going, winning the event, thus setting a new and rather revealing trend. Whatever the origin, the effect was undeniably minimalist. You can almost feel the liberating breeze on their skin, the sense of complete freedom from restriction. It's a feeling that resonates with letting go, with surrendering to the quiet flow. And here's a quirky tidbit. While men competed nude, there were rules surrounding the attire, or lack thereof, for those who didn't compete. As we remembered from a previous section, married women were forbidden from even attending the games. However, unmarried women were allowed to watch, and they did so fully clothed. This stark contrast in attire between male athletes and female spectators further highlights the unique cultural context of naked athleticism. It wasn't about prurience. It was about a specific set of cultural norms for male physical display. Within a religious context, the very specific nature of these rules adds another layer of quiet, contemplative detail to our historical tapestry. Beyond nudity for runners, Other events sometimes involved minimal gear. For wrestlers and who engaged in hand-to-hand combat, they would often oil their bodies. This wasn't for aesthetic appeal. It was to make it harder for opponents to get a grip, and also served as a form of sun protection and skincare in the harsh Greek sun. Imagine the gentle sheen of olive oil on sun-kissed skin, the soft, slippery sensation. It's a sensory detail that is more soothing than stimulating, a subtle lubrication that adds to the quiet grace of their movements. For events like the discus throw or javelin throw, the gear was simply the implement itself. The discus was a heavy, circular disc made of stone, bronze, or iron. The javelin was a wooden spear, sometimes with a leather thong wrapped around it to aid in grip and rotation. There were no specialized gloves, no weighted training vests, no high-tech measuring devices. The focus was entirely on the athlete's natural skill and strength, honed by simple, repetitive practice. The weighty thud of the discus as it landed, the soft hiss of the javelin cutting through the air. These were the only sounds of gear in action, and they were wonderfully understated. Even the facilities were minimalist. The running tracks were simply compacted earth, not rubberized surfaces. There were no starting blocks, just lines scratched in the dirt, or sometimes a stone slab with grooves for the feet called balbies. Imagine the feeling of digging your toes into the soft earth, the simple connection to the ground beneath you. It grounds the athlete, quite literally, in the natural world, fostering a quiet stability that is deeply calming. The sounds of bare feet on dirt, a soft, repetitive scuffing, is the most profound kind of rhythm for relaxation. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of the gear led to more natural, less injury-prone forms of movement, or if it simply meant athletes had to rely even more heavily on their raw physical resilience. It's likely a combination. The absence of supportive footwear meant feet and ankles had to be incredibly strong and adaptable. The lack of specialized equipment forced a deeper connection to the body's intrinsic mechanics. It was all about what the body could do, unassisted, unaugmented. This purity of movement, stripped bare of all embellishments, is beautifully conducive to a state of quiet contemplation. Consider the sensory experience of an athlete in this minimalist context. No tight clothes restricting movement, no heavy shoes clunking on the ground. Just the feel of the air on their skin, the sun's warmth, the tactile sensation of the earth under their bare feet. It's a profound connection to the environment, a return to basics that encourages the mind to slow down and simply be. This uncluttered physical experience translates into an uncluttered mental space, perfect for drifting off. Even the victory prizes, as we mentioned earlier, were simple: an olive wreath, perhaps a ribbon. No elaborate garments, no expensive jewelry. The focus was on the symbolic honor, not on material possessions. This lack of material clutter reinforces the overall minimalist aesthetic of the ancient games. Everything was pared down to its essentials, leaving ample space for quietude and calm. So, as you picture these ancient athletes, moving freely and unencumbered under the vast Greek sky, their bodies unadorned, their gear consisting of little more than the earth beneath their feet and the air around them, let that profound simplicity wash over you. Feel the ease of movement, the absence of restriction, the quiet purity of human effort. This incredibly basic approach to athletic gear, this embrace of the unadorned body, is yet another gentle whisper from history, guiding you deeper into the comfortable, uncomplicated embrace of sleep. Just let go, just feel the quiet freedom, and drift. From the stark simplicity of ancient athletic gear, we now gently float into the equally understated realm of victory rituals, subdued local celebrations. If your mind conjures images of fireworks, ticker tape parades, and athletes doing victory laps with their national flags, you're picturing a world entirely different from the quiet realities of ancient Greek Olympic triumphs. These were celebrations steeped in community, reverence, and a profound lack of ostentation, perfect for lulling you into a peaceful slumber. Imagine the conclusion of an event at Olympia. There wasn't a blaring anthem, no dramatic pause for the presentation of medals. Instead, the victor would step forward, perhaps a little tired, certainly dusty, and be presented with the simplest of accolades, a katinos, an olive branch taken from the sacred wild olive tree, the Callistofanos meaning of the beautiful crowns near the temple of Zeus. This wasn't a shiny, heavy medal. It was a leafy twig. Imagine the feeling of those cool, smooth leaves, the subtle, earthy scent of olive. It's a very organic, very understated symbol of achievement. The sound of it being gently placed upon the victor's head would be soft, almost imperceptible amidst the quiet murmurs of the crowd. Historians still argue whether the choice of the olive branch was purely symbolic of peace and fertility, or if it also represented the temporary, almost fleeting nature of earthly glory compared to divine favor. Whatever its deeper meaning, its inherent lack of material value ensured that the focus remained on the honor and the divine blessing, not on the accumulation of wealth or flashy status symbols. This emphasis on the spiritual over the material, the quiet honor over loud spectacle, is inherently soothing. A mainstream historical fact about these victory rituals is that the olive branches were cut with a golden sickle by a young boy whose parents were still living, emphasizing purity and a connection to tradition. This specific detail adds a layer of almost ritualistic slowness to the process. It wasn't a production line. It was a carefully observed custom. You can almost see the sunlight glinting off the sickle, hear the soft snap of the branch as it's cut, a sound that whispers of ancient rites and timeless practice. This precise, almost meditative execution of the ritual ensures there's no sudden burst of excitement, just a gentle, ceremonial unfolding. And here's a quirky tidbit. While the olive wreath was the official prize at Olympia, some victors also received a tinea, a woolen ribbon tied around their head or arm, and a palm branch held in the hand. So, imagine a victor, looking somewhat disheveled after their effort, now adorned with a leafy crown, a simple ribbon, and a palm branch. It's a subtle statement, not a grand declaration. The rustle of the palm leaves, the gentle sway of the ribbon, these are quiet, natural movements, far from the dynamic fanfare of modern accolades. The sheer lack of glitter and pomp contributes to the pervasive calm. Once the olive wreath was conferred, the immediate aftermath at Olympia itself was quite subdued. There wasn't a podium. No national anthems. City-states didn't have distinct anthems in the modern sense, and no immediate round of interviews. The victor would likely walk away, perhaps to receive quiet congratulations from their trainers or fellow countrymen, and then prepare for the journey home. The focus was on the ritual's completion, not on an extended celebration. The crowd, after a few polite claps, would likely begin to disperse, their attention turning to the next event, or more likely, to the prospect of dinner and some much-needed rest. The true celebration often occurred upon the victor's return to their home city-state, and even these were often community-focused and locally scaled, not enormous spectacles. Imagine a sleepy homecoming, a modest procession, perhaps, with the victor entering through a special breach in the city walls, symbolizing that a city with such a hero needed no walls. You wouldn't find roaring crowds lining miles of streets. It would be neighbors, family, and local dignitaries cheering softly, perhaps offering a simple meal. The focus was on the shared pride of the community, a quiet glow of collective satisfaction. The benefits to the victor were also largely local and communal. They might receive free meals for life at the public Prytanean town hall, or a modest sum of money or tax exemptions. It wasn't about becoming an overnight millionaire celebrity. It was about stability, respect within their community, and a gentle assurance of future comfort. This security, this quiet continuation of a comfortable life, is incredibly soothing to contemplate. You wouldn't be hounded by paparazzi. You'd simply be able to enjoy your dinner in peace. Historians still argue whether the local honors bestowed upon victors were more valuable to them than the Olympic olive wreath itself. It's a chicken or egg question. Did the local benefits drive the desire for Olympic victory, or was the Olympic glory itself enough? Regardless, the system ensured that the impact of victory remained primarily local and personal, rather than cascading into widespread, overwhelming fame. The fame was gentle, manageable, and confined to the familiar rhythms of their home city. Consider the atmosphere of these homecoming celebrations. No booming music, no flashing lights. Perhaps the gentle strumming of a lyre, the quiet singing of traditional odes, the murmur of familiar voices. It would be a calm, reassuring welcome, a return to the comfort of home, not a jarring descent into a chaotic spotlight. The feeling of being back in one's own bed, after a long journey and a period of gentle effort, is perhaps the most profound victory of all. Even the artistic representations of victors were relatively understated. They might commission a statue, but these were often idealized forms, less about capturing a specific moment of athletic triumph, and more about embodying abstract virtues like discipline and strength. The statues stood quietly in public spaces, a permanent but silent reminder of past achievements, not a loud proclamation. Their stillness, their timeless quietude, contributes to the overall sense of peace. So, as you picture the ancient Olympic victor, not roaring in triumph, but standing quietly, the simple olive wreath resting on their head, then returning to a modest, heartfelt welcome in their home city, let the profound understatedness of it all wash over you. Feel the quiet pride, the gentle community support, the lack of overwhelming fanfare. These were victories celebrated with a soft breath, a gentle nod, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. This peaceful, low-key celebration of ancient glory is the perfect thought to carry you deeper into the tranquil, unhurried embrace of sleep. Just let the quiet, gentle honor of the past guide your descent into dreams. Having gently witnessed the subdued triumphs of ancient victors, we now shift our focus from the human element to the very ground upon which these quiet spectacles unfolded. Olympia's development, slow, incremental growth. Forget bustling construction, sites with cranes and endless clamor. The evolution of the Olympic sanctuary was a patient, unhurried process, a testament to slow accretion rather than rapid expansion, perfectly designed to lull you into a state of deep, peaceful contemplation. Imagine the earliest iteration of Olympia. It wasn't a grand complex of temples and stadiums. It was likely just a sacred grove, a simple, open space nestled in a valley, where a few altars stood, perhaps made of unadorned stone or compacted ash from centuries of sacrifice. The first structures would have been incredibly rudimentary. A basic, flat track for the stadium race. Perhaps some designated areas for wrestling, all carved directly from the earth itself. There were no grand architectural plans, no blueprints for a monumental future. Just the quiet, organic development of a sacred space growing at the pace of trees. You can almost feel the soft, uneven earth beneath your feet, the sense of timelessness clinging to the ancient stones. It's the kind of place that invites slow walking, quiet observation, and ultimately, a profound sense of calm. Historians still argue whether the initial modest development of Olympia was due to limited resources, a deliberate preference for simplicity, rooted in religious doctrine, or simply the slow pace of life and technological advancement in the archaic period. It was likely a blend of all these factors. The early Greeks were pragmatic, and grand building projects were monumental undertakings requiring significant labor and wealth. So, development was a gentle, incremental process, like a slow-growing tree gradually adding rings to its trunk. Each new addition was a thoughtful, considered step, not a sudden burst of ambition. A mainstream historical fact is that the most significant early structure at Olympia was the Temple of Hera. Dating back to around 600 BCE, even this, while substantial, was built gradually over many years, perhaps decades. Its early form likely involved timber columns, slowly replaced over time by stone. Imagine the quiet, rhythmic sounds of construction, the soft tap of stone against stone, the gentle scrape of tools, the muted thud of earth being moved. It's not the piercing whine of modern machinery. It's the patient, consistent rhythm of human hands at work. A soundscape that becomes a gentle hum in your ears, drawing you deeper into relaxation. And here's a quirky tidbit. The very first stadium at Olympia was simply a flat expanse of earth. There were no permanent stone seating arrangements for centuries. Spectators would sit on the grassy slopes surrounding the track, or stand for the duration of the events. This meant that any expansion of spectator capacity was entirely organic. More people simply found more space on the natural contours of the land. The architecture of the stadium was, in essence, the landscape itself, a truly minimalist design choice. This natural integration of the human activity with the environment adds to the feeling of effortless calm. Over time, more permanent structures began to appear, but always with a sense of measured practicality. The Bouleuterian Council House was built for the administrative duties of the games, but its primary function was practical and governmental, not ostentatious. The Palestra and gymnasium emerged as training grounds for athletes, but these were functional spaces designed for exercise, not for architectural grandeur. They were places of quiet, disciplined effort, their stone walls absorbing the sounds of light footsteps and hushed conversations, creating an atmosphere of focused tranquility. The sacred precinct, the altus, remained the spiritual heart of Olympia, defined by its natural boundaries and the slow accumulation of votive offerings and small shrines. It wasn't about imposing structures, but about the presence of the divine, quietly expressed through ancient altars and sacred trees. The sheer quantity of smaller, less remarkable offerings and minor structures that accumulated over centuries speaks to the slow, continuous stream of devotion, a persistent, gentle presence rather than a sudden, dramatic declaration. Each small statue, each simple offering, contributed to a slowly growing sense of history, one quiet layer at a time. Historians still argue whether the slow pace of architectural development at Olympia reflected a reverence for the ancient, untouched nature of the site, or simply the pragmatic realities of funding and engineering capabilities. It's a fascinating thought. Perhaps they could have built faster, but chose not to, out of a deeper respect for the existing tranquility of the sacred space. The emphasis was on permanence and stability, not on rapid innovation. Buildings were designed to last for centuries, slowly weathering the elements, becoming one with the landscape rather than dominating it. This profound sense of enduring stability is an anchor for the mind, allowing thoughts to settle. Consider the atmosphere of Olympia through the centuries of its development. It wasn't a constant buzz of activity, but rather long periods of quiet stillness, punctuated by the quadrennial flurry of the games. For much of the time, it would have been a peaceful, almost deserted sanctuary, tended by a handful of priests and caretakers. Imagine the gentle rustle of leaves, the distant bleating of sheep, the soft whisper of the wind through ancient stones. These are the natural sounds of a place slowly, organically evolving, an auditory landscape of profound serenity. The very stone used for construction would have been quarried and transported slowly, perhaps by oxen or human labor. Each block moved, each wall laid, represented immense, patient effort. There was no rush, no artificial deadlines. The buildings grew at the pace of the seasons, each winter's rains and summer's sun slowly shaping and refining them. This unhurried process of creation, the visible testament to generations of quiet labor, is a deep, calming rhythm to contemplate. You can almost feel the weight of the stone, the cool smoothness of its surface, a tangible link to a patiently built past. Even the roads leading to Olympia developed slowly, from simple paths to slightly more defined routes, but always dusty, always demanding. They weren't paved highways, but rather long, winding arteries that echoed the slow journey of pilgrimage. The development wasn't just in the sanctuary itself, but in the slow, gradual improvement of the infrastructure that allowed people to reach it, inch by quiet inch. So, as you visualize the sanctuary of Olympia, not as a static, finished masterpiece, but as a living, slowly breathing entity, gently growing over centuries, let its profound incremental development wash over you. Feel the quiet reverence for the natural world, the patient accretion of stone and tradition, the slow, unwavering commitment to a sacred purpose. This long, gentle unfolding of Olympia's history, its quiet persistence, is yet another soft whisper from the ancient world, inviting you to embrace the profound calm of gradual change and drift deeper into the peaceful embrace of sleep. Having explored the tranquil, slow growth of Olympia itself, we now shift our sleepy lens away from the athletic grounds and into the broader rhythm of ancient Greek civilization, immersing ourselves in everyday life beyond the games. This isn't about heroes or grand battles, but about the quiet, ceaseless hum of mundane domestic routines, the slow, consistent pulse of ordinary existence that forms the backdrop to all of history. It's the kind of background noise that perfectly prepares you for a deep, undisturbed sleep. Imagine waking in an ancient Greek household. Your alarm wouldn't be a jarring sound, but the gradual brightening of the sky, perhaps the distant crow of a rooster, or the gentle stirrings of livestock. Life moved at the pace of the sun, dictated by the simple, unhurried demands of agriculture and craftsmanship. For most people, the day began with collecting water from the communal well or a nearby spring, a rhythmic, repetitive task that built quiet strength. You can almost feel the cool stone of the well, the gentle creak of the rope, the soft splash of water filling a clay pot. These are the sounds of patient, daily necessity, not hurried effort. Historians still argue whether the perceived leisure of ancient Greek citizens, particularly Athenian men, was genuinely widespread or largely a privilege of the elite, made possible by the labor of slaves. Regardless, for the vast majority, life was characterized by consistent, low-intensity labor. Farmers tended their fields, often walking for miles a day behind oxen or carrying heavy baskets of produce. Artisans worked meticulously, their hands engaged in slow, repetitive motions, weaving cloth, shaping pottery, carving wood. These were tasks that demanded patience, precision, and a meditative focus, not speed or frantic energy. A mainstream historical fact is that the ancient Greek economy was overwhelmingly agrarian. This meant that the vast majority of the population spent their days engaged in farming, a profoundly cyclical and slow endeavor. Planting, weeding, harvesting, each step was spread out over weeks or months, dictated by the seasons, not by arbitrary deadlines. The rhythm of the earth was the rhythm of their lives, a slow, patient beat. You can almost feel the warmth of the sun on your back as you stoop to plant seeds, the gentle give of the soil under your fingers. It's a peaceful connection to the most fundamental aspects of existence. And here's a quirky tidbit. The ancient Greeks often ate only 2 main meals a day, a light breakfast and a more substantial evening meal. There were no elaborate lunches or constant snacking. This lack of constant food preparation and consumption meant fewer interruptions to the day's gentle flow. Meal times were simple, social affairs, often eaten cross-legged on the floor, focusing on conversation and community rather than culinary adventure. The very predictability of their eating habits adds to the overall sense of unhurried calm. Imagine the soft clinking of pottery, the quiet murmur of voices, the scent of simple, wholesome food. For women, daily life revolved around the household, which was a microcosm of industry. They processed food, made clothes, and managed the domestic sphere with a quiet, tireless dedication. Spinning wool, weaving fabric, baking bread, these were highly skilled tasks that involved countless hours of repetitive, manual labor. Imagine the gentle whir of a spindle, the rhythmic clack of a loom, the comforting aroma of baking bread. These are the sounds and smells of quiet industry, of lives lived with a gentle, consistent purpose. Unburdened by frantic rushing, the concept of time itself was experienced differently. Without mechanical clocks, hours were marked by the sun's position, by the length of shadows, by the simple, organic progression of day to night. There was less urgency, less pressure to maximize every minute. If a task wasn't finished today, it would simply be continued tomorrow. This unpressured relationship with time is profoundly relaxing, allowing for a natural deceleration of thought. You're not racing against a clock. You're simply moving with the flow. Historians still argue whether the relative scarcity of written records from the daily lives of ordinary people means their existence was truly less complex, or if it simply reflects the biases of surviving literature, which focused on grander narratives. But the material evidence, the simple tools, the basic housing, the durable but unadorned pottery, all point to a life lived close to the ground, with few distractions and a strong emphasis on practical utility. It's a life devoid of unnecessary complexity, allowing the mind to quieten. Even their social interactions often involved a slower pace. Conversations might last for hours over cups of watered wine at a symposium. or simply sitting in the agora, observing the gentle flow of daily life. There was less digital distraction, less pressure to constantly be on. Friendships and community bonds were forged through shared experiences and long, quiet discussions, not through fleeting digital interactions. The gentle rhythm of ancient conversation, unhurried and thoughtful, is another soothing thread in our historical tapestry. Consider the transportation of the time. Most journeys were made on foot or by slow-moving donkey cart. This meant that any travel, even within a city, was a deliberate, unhurried affair. There was no concept of a rush hour. The streets might be busy, but the pace was always human, dictated by the slow shuffle of feet and hooves. The sounds of daily movement, the creak of cartwheels, the soft padding of sandals, the distant lowing of cattle, all contribute to a constant low-level hum that is inherently tranquil. Even ancient education, for those fortunate enough to receive it, was often a slow, methodical process, involving memorization, recitation, and quiet contemplation of texts. There were no fast-paced lectures or quick-fire quizzes. Learning was a journey of patient absorption, fostering a deep, quiet understanding rather than superficial recall. It's a model of learning that encourages profound calm and thoughtful introspection. So, as you picture the quiet domestic routines of ancient Greek life, the rhythmic movements of daily labor, the slow flow of time, and the gentle pace of social interaction, let this pervasive sense of unhurried existence wash over you. Feel the earth beneath your feet, hear the soft sounds of a distant, agrarian world, and let the gentle, persistent rhythm of their everyday lives guide you deeper into the quiet, comfortable embrace of sleep. Just breathe, just exist within this peaceful historical moment, and let yourself drift. As the gentle hum of ancient domesticity fades into the quiet past, we must now reluctantly acknowledge the slow, almost imperceptible decline of the very institution we've been so quietly observing, the ancient Olympic Games. This isn't a dramatic collapse or a sudden, catastrophic end. Instead, it's a story of a long, quiet nap, a gradual drifting into obscurity, followed by an even slower, painstaking reawakening. Welcome to decline and revival, a long, quiet nap. Imagine the ancient games, not as a vibrant, ever-growing entity, but as an old, beloved custom, slowly losing its luster, like a cherished textile fading over centuries. After flourishing for over a millennium, the Olympic Games began a long, drawn-out decline, a gradual fade that was less a dramatic finale and more a drawn-out sigh. This wasn't because of a single catastrophic event, but a confluence of slow, subtle changes, each one incrementally eroding the game's significance. You can almost feel the slow dimming of the lights, the quiet emptying of the once sacred grounds. It's a gentle, mournful kind of history, perfect for drawing you into deeper slumber. Historians still argue whether the decline was primarily due to the rise of Roman influence, the increasing corruption and professionalism of the games, or the growing dominance of Christianity. It was likely a complex interplay of these factors, each contributing to a slow, almost imperceptible shift in priorities. When the Romans conquered Greece, they initially respected the Olympic Games and even participated, but Roman spectacles often favored gladiatorial contests and chariot races, which were far more violent and sensational than the traditional Greek athletic events. The quiet dignity of the stadium race simply couldn't compete with the roar of the Colosseum. A mainstream historical fact is that the traditional end of the ancient Olympic Games is often cited as 393 CE, when the Christian Roman Emperor Theodosius I issued a decree banning all pagan cults and practices. However, this wasn't an immediate, dramatic shutdown of the games. The decree was part of a broader shift in religious and cultural attitudes, and the games likely limped on for a few more years, perhaps in a much reduced and local form, before finally ceasing altogether. It was less a sudden guillotine and more a slow, fading whisper. Imagine the last few athletes gathering, perhaps more out of habit than enthusiasm. The few remaining spectators quietly observing, knowing that a long era was finally, peacefully, coming to its end. And here's a quirky tidbit: the very site of Olympia itself, after the games ceased, slowly succumbed to nature and natural disasters. Earthquakes and floods buried the once sacred site under layers of silt and debris. It wasn't purposefully destroyed. It was simply forgotten, slowly covered by the patient hand of time and the indifferent forces of nature. Imagine the slow accumulation of earth and vegetation, gradually reclaiming the stadium, covering the temples, turning a place of human endeavor into a quiet, overgrown mound. It's the ultimate embodiment of history fading into the landscape, a profoundly soothing image of nature's gentle reclaiming. The dark ages that followed were truly dark for the Olympic tradition. For over 1,000 years, the games existed only in dusty scrolls and forgotten memories. The idea of large-scale athletic competitions simply vanished from the European consciousness. Life was local, harsh, and utterly devoid of such organized leisure. It was a long, deep sleep for the Olympic ideal, a period of utter quietude where the concept lay dormant, waiting for the distant stirrings of a new era. The thought of such a long, profound silence, stretching across centuries, is incredibly calming, allowing your own mind to rest deeply. The revival, then, was not a sudden burst of inspiration, but a painstaking process of rediscovery. Beginning in the Renaissance, European scholars slowly began to rediscover ancient Greek texts, including descriptions of the Olympic Games. But this was an academic pursuit, not a popular movement. It was the quiet work of scholars poring over old manuscripts by candlelight, slowly piecing together fragments of a forgotten past. You can almost hear the rustle of brittle parchment, the soft scratch of a quill pen, sounds that speak of slow, deliberate learning and quiet contemplation. The idea of reviving the games in a modern form took centuries to germinate. Early attempts were localized and sporadic, little more than athletic festivals inspired by the ancient ideal. For example, the Much Wenlock Olympian Games, founded in England in 1850 by Dr. William Penny Brooks, were a local event, a charming, somewhat quaint precursor to the modern Olympics. Imagine a small village fete with a few races and some local sports, all inspired by a dim understanding of ancient glory. It's a wonderfully unassuming origin story, far from the grand narratives we often associate with revival. Historians still argue about the precise moment when the idea of a truly international Olympic revival began to solidify. Was it the growing spirit of internationalism in the late 19th century? The surge of archaeological discoveries at Olympia, which began in the mid-1800s, slowly unearthing the buried site, or the tireless efforts of one man? Most credit Baron Pierre de Coubertin, a French educator and historian, who, starting in the 1880s, became the primary driving force behind the modern Olympic movement. De Coubertin's vision wasn't one of immediate, explosive grandeur. It was a long, patient campaign of persuasion, correspondence, and quiet diplomacy. He traveled, he wrote, he spoke to small groups, slowly building consensus for an idea that many initially dismissed as a pipe dream. Imagine the endless, polite meetings, the gradual accumulation of support, the sheer persistence required to slowly coax such a monumental idea into existence. It was a marathon of bureaucratic effort, not a sprint of charismatic leadership. The actual unearthing of Olympia by German archaeologists in the 1870s was a painfully slow process, meticulously digging away centuries of earth and debris, carefully cataloguing every fragment. The discoveries fired the imagination of people like de Coubertin, providing tangible proof of the ancient games, breathing quiet life back into the dormant ideal. Imagine the soft scrape of a trowel, the gentle brushing away of dirt, slowly revealing a buried column, a forgotten statue. It's the slow, deliberate work of revelation, a quiet unveiling of history. So, as you contemplate the long, gentle nap of the ancient Olympic Games, their slow fade into obscurity, and their even slower, painstaking reawakening through the quiet efforts of scholars and dreamers, let that profound sense of cyclical time wash over you. Feel the quiet peace of things ending not with a bang, but with a whisper, and beginning again not with a shout, but with a gentle stirring. This long drawn-out history of decline and revival is the perfect narrative to soothe your mind, easing you deeper into the quiet, comfortable embrace of sleep. Just let the gentle rhythm of forgetting and remembering guide your descent into dreams. From the slow, almost geological reawakening of the Olympic ideal, we now find ourselves on the cusp of something new, yet still delightfully awkward and understated. Modern marathon's birth, a stumbling start. Forget the sleek, professional events of today, the elite athletes in futuristic gear, and the perfectly measured courses. The very first modern marathon, a crucial piece of our slowest marathon puzzle, was a wonderfully clunky, somewhat chaotic affair, filled with more earnest enthusiasm than organized efficiency. It's the kind of charmingly unpolished history that perfectly prepares you for a deep, tranquil sleep. Imagine the year 1896, the inaugural modern Olympic Games held in Athens. The grand idea of a marathon race was conceived to commemorate the legendary run of the ancient Greek messenger, Phidippides, who supposedly ran from the Battle of Marathon to Athens to announce victory. This ancient tale, while inspiring, was also rather long and, frankly, a bit exhausting to think about. The organizers of the new games decided to recreate this epic feat, but they did so with all the organizational precision of a well-meaning but slightly confused committee. Historians still argue whether Phidippides actually ran the full distance, or if the story is largely legendary, a poetic flourish added by later chroniclers. But the idea of his endurance was powerful enough to inspire. The first modern marathon, unlike the ancient Olympic stadium race, was conceived as a truly long-distance event from the outset, a tribute to a single, epic, and rather exhausting run. It was a brand new concept for competitive sport, truly, pushing the boundaries of what was considered a formal race. A mainstream historical fact is that the distance of the first modern marathon was approximately 40 kilometers, or about 24.8 miles, which was roughly the distance from the actual battlefield of Marathon to Athens. This wasn't the standardized 42.195 kilometers, 26.2 miles we know today. That precise, almost arbitrary number wouldn't be set until the London Olympics of 1908, adjusted for the British royal family to have a perfect view from Windsor Castle to the finish line. So, the original marathon was a slightly shorter, yet still immensely challenging, untamed beast of a race. The lack of standardized distance adds to its charmingly unorganized feel. A gentle reminder that even grand sporting traditions often begin with a bit of a shrug. And here's a quirky tidbit. The marathon course in 1896 was a dirt road, often unpaved and uneven. There were no clearly marked lines, no smooth asphalt, no perfectly positioned aid stations. Runners navigated dust, pebbles, and the occasional curious donkey. Imagine the feel of that rough terrain underfoot, the constant, slight adjustments needed with every stride. It was less a precision event and more a prolonged, slightly gritty trek. The sounds would have been minimal. The soft pad of worn shoes, the occasional cough or heavy breath, the distant murmur of a few scattered spectators along the route. It's the very antithesis of a high-speed, glossy event, making it wonderfully so porific. The participants themselves were a mixed bag. Some were genuine athletes, others were simply enthusiastic amateurs, and a few were, shall we say, eccentrics. There was no rigorous qualification process. Anyone who felt up to the immense challenge could, in theory, toe the line. This amateur spirit contributed to the disorganized but heartfelt atmosphere. You weren't witnessing a clash of titans. You were watching ordinary people attempt something extraordinary, slowly and with varying degrees of success. The race itself unfolded with a lack of dramatic incident that makes it perfect for our sleepy narrative. The favored Greek runner, Spiridon Louis, a water carrier from a nearby village, eventually won. His victory wasn't a sudden, electrifying burst. Accounts suggest he maintained a steady, almost plodding pace throughout much of the race, conserving his energy while others burned out. He even stopped for a glass of wine and some oranges from a friend during the race. A true testament to the informal, unhurried nature of the event. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of such a leisurely stop, the gentle sip of wine, the sticky sweetness of the orange. It's a moment of delightful historical inefficiency that brings a smile and eases the mind. Historians still argue whether Lewis's victory was a stroke of genius pacing, or simply the triumph of local knowledge and natural endurance over less prepared foreign competitors. Regardless, his triumph became a symbol of Greek national pride, a quiet vindication of their historical claim to the Games. His fame was immediate but localized, a humble hero for a humble but significant event. The applause would have been heartfelt but likely not deafening, a warm wave of appreciation rather than an explosive roar. The marathon was quickly embraced as a signature event for the modern Olympics, largely due to its strong historical narrative and its appeal as an ultimate test of human endurance. It became a centerpiece, not for its speed or excitement, but for its sheer, uncompromising length. It offered a kind of quiet heroism, a challenge that any ordinary person could understand, even if they couldn't complete it. This accessibility to the concept, even for non-runners, makes it profoundly relatable and therefore gently engaging. Consider the early organization of the race. There were no sophisticated medical teams, no carefully planned hydration strategies, no digital timing chips. Officials might have been on horseback, or simply standing at key points, taking manual times with rudimentary stopwatches. The communication would have been slow, relying on runners carrying messages or shouting updates. It was a logistical challenge, undertaken with admirable, if somewhat clumsy, enthusiasm. This charming inefficiency is part of its sleepy appeal. The lack of consistent training methods, coupled with the variable conditions of the course, meant that simply finishing the marathon was considered a monumental achievement. Speed was secondary to survival. The very concept of personal bests was in its infancy. The ultimate goal was to complete the grueling distance, to prove one's mettle against the road itself, not necessarily against other runners. It was a competition with the self, a long internal dialogue of persistence. So, as you picture the first modern marathon, a slightly dusty, wonderfully unorganized race across the Greek countryside, with amateur athletes, impromptu wine stops, and a general air of earnest clumsiness, let that quiet spirit of endurance wash over you. Feel the steady rhythm of footsteps on a rough road, the quiet determination of the runners, the gentle hum of an idea slowly taking shape. This stumbling, yet significant, beginning of the modern marathon is the perfect image to accompany you deeper into the tranquil, unhurried embrace of sleep. Just let the steady, gentle journey of history guide your descent into dreams. Having ambled through the quaint, stumbling birth of the modern marathon, we now approach the present day, finding that even in its most contemporary form, the marathon retains a charming, utterly soporific essence. Welcome to the marathon today. Still quite a drag. Forget the electrifying images of elite athletes crossing the finish line in a blur. For most participants, and certainly for the casual observer, the modern marathon is a long, drawn-out affair, a testament to endurance in its most accessible and, frankly, most sleep-inducing form. Imagine a major city marathon today. You might picture hundreds, even thousands, of runners, all dressed in brightly colored high-tech gear. But zoom in past the front runners, and you'll find the vast majority of participants are not chasing world records. They are plodding, shuffling, walking, and sometimes even crawling their way through 26.2 miles of urban landscape. The soundscape isn't a roar of continuous cheers, but often a quiet hum of footsteps, the soft rustle of expensive fabrics, the distant strains of a band playing a slightly off-key tune, and the intermittent, almost encouraging murmur of spectators. It's a collective, sustained effort that unfolds with a glacial slowness, perfect for lulling you into a state of deep, peaceful contemplation. Historians still argue whether the widespread popularity of the modern marathon is due to its perceived health benefits, its accessible challenge, or simply because it offers a very long, very public opportunity for people to prove something to themselves. It's a unique sporting event where the act of completion often overshadows the competitive outcome. The vast majority of runners are not competing against each other. They are competing against the distance, against their own limitations, and against the relentless passage of time. This internal battle, playing out over hours, is a profoundly personal and quiet drama, largely invisible to the casual eye. A mainstream historical fact is that the marathon distance of 42.195 kilometers, 26.2 miles, was standardized only in 1921, after several Olympic Games used varying lengths. This precise, somewhat arbitrary number, rooted in the 1908 London Olympics' desire to start the race at Windsor Castle, adds a quirky layer of detail to its modern legacy. It's a very specific number for a very long, slow endeavor. Imagine mentally calculating that distance. It's enough to make your brain tired just thinking about it. And that, my friends, is exactly the goal. And here's a quirky tidbit. During many modern marathons, particularly in the later stages of the race, you'll find runners dressed in elaborate costumes, dinosaurs, superheroes, giant bananas. These aren't elite athletes. They're individuals participating for charity, for personal challenge, or simply for the sheer joy of it. Their slow, often cumbersome progress adds a layer of surreal, almost dreamlike quality to the event. Imagine a weary T-Rex shuffling past, its rubbery legs barely moving, its expression, if it had one, probably mirroring your own sleepy face. It's a visual absurdity that makes the entire spectacle even more wonderfully, delightfully slow. Consider the training for a modern marathon. For many, it's a long, arduous process of slow, repetitive runs, day after day, week after week. Early, morning jogs in the dark, long, lonely hours on the road, battling boredom and fatigue. It's a testament to dedication, but it's rarely thrilling. The vast majority of training miles are accumulated at a conversational pace, meaning you could comfortably chat with a friend as you run. It's the very definition of low intensity, extended effort, echoing the monotonous physical demands of ancient life, the rhythmic sound of footsteps, the steady breathing, the quiet focus on the road ahead. These are the sounds and sensations of patient, persistent effort, pulling you deeper into a tranquil state. Even the aid stations, while plentiful and well-stocked, contribute to the marathon's gentle pace. Runners slow down, grab water, perhaps a gel, and then resume their deliberate forward motion. It's a series of micro-pauses, small acts of self-care that break up the already lengthy journey, preventing any sudden bursts of unsustainable speed. You can almost feel the refreshing coolness of the water, the brief moment of respite, before resuming that steady, unchanging pace. The experience of hitting the wall, that moment of profound fatigue and energy depletion, is a common marathon phenomenon. It's when the body insists on slowing down, often to a walk, despite the mind's best intentions. This natural, almost inevitable deceleration is a core part of the marathon narrative for both participants and observers. It's the body saying, time to take a long, slow nap, and often the body wins. This forced slowness, this physical surrender to the demands of distance, is inherently calming. Historians still argue whether the modern marathon truly connects us to ancient endurance, or if it's an entirely new beast born of modern sensibilities and a romanticized view of the past. Regardless, its endurance, its sheer length, and its accessibility have made it a global phenomenon, a symbol of quiet human persistence. It's not about superhuman feats for the vast majority. It's about the very human act of simply putting one foot in front of the other for a very, very long time. Think of the finishing line. For many, it's not a sprint, but a slow, triumphant shuffle, a gentle crossing of an invisible barrier. The emotions are often relief, exhaustion, and a quiet sense of accomplishment, rather than explosive joy. The congratulations are often whispered, the hugs gentle, the photographs taken in slow motion. It's an understated climax to a wonderfully drawn-out ordeal. The marathon, in essence, is the ultimate boring history for sleep in action. It's a sport that celebrates the opposite of speed, the inverse of explosive power. It celebrates sustained, deliberate effort, the quiet triumph of simply continuing. It demands patience from its participants and its spectators. It is a long, winding story told not in words, but in footsteps, each one adding to the profound sense of methodical progression. It's the ultimate lullaby, a testament to the soothing power of monotony. So, as you envision the modern marathon stretching out before you, kilometer after kilometer, mile after mile, let the steady, gentle rhythm of the runners, the quiet hum of the crowd, and the pervasive sense of enduring effort wash over you. Feel the quiet determination, the steady breathing, the slow, relentless progression, this long, gentle, and utterly unhurried journey through the history of endurance, culminating in the wonderfully tedious modern marathon, is the perfect final thought to carry you deeper into the most profound, most peaceful, and most complete sleep. Just let the quiet, persistent hum of the marathon guide your final, deep descent into dreams.